Okay, we are ready.
All right, great. Welcome to the September 15th, 2022 meeting of the CB6 Public Safety Committee. My name is Matt Roberts. I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and this meeting is being called to order at 6:31 p.m. Tonight, we're joined by CB6 Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. As a reminder, New York State law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on, your name is not properly displayed, you cannot count towards the quorum. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. We still need a volunteer to take minutes for tonight. It's really just a quick meeting summary. So if you're able to do so, please raise your hand through Zoom. And there's still the doodle sign-up sheet for the upcoming meetings. Hopefully everybody on the committee will be able to take the minutes at some point. Be posted in the chat.
One note I should make for all members, the office sends a meeting summary template to anyone who takes the meeting summary, as well as any information that you need, such as the transcript of the meeting, the YouTube video of the meeting, any presentations, etc. So we make it as easy as possible.
So any volunteers? If not, we'll have to appoint someone. John?
I see John has his hand raised.
All right. First meeting, and all right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, so that brings us to the roll call attendance, and Brendan can call the roll.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Jonathan DeRico.
Present.
Stu Desser. Stu Desser. Okay, I do see Stu here, so I am marking you as present. Eric Goldberg.
Present.
Sadie Howard.
Present.
Steve O.
Present.
Matt Roberts.
Present.
Sina Shaw.
Present.
And Lou, I know, is not able to join us tonight, but we have a quorum.
All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. You're counted as present for the record, Stu.
All right. So if we're ready to move on to adopting the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is now on the screen before you. Committee members, if there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. If anyone objects to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing none, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. Minutes from the June 16th committee meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there's no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. If you object, please raise your hand through Zoom, or if you have any corrections, please raise your hand. Seeing none, the minutes from the June 16th meeting are adopted and be available on the CB6 website in the near future. All right, ground rules. I think most of you are familiar with these. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. Chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks need to be made on the record. Raise your hand through Zoom. If you do have a technical issue, you can alert us through the chat or to state in writing information, email address that was already on the record. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I'll identify you. You can unmute yourself. And as a reminder, New York State law requires a verbatim transcript of the meeting, so please keep your comments and questions the same discussion. And we already covered the Zoom cameras need to remain on at all times for Committee members, even if you're in need to step away from your computer, you still leave the camera on. That really applies to committee members. Committee business. So we'll go through the agenda that we just had on the screen. We'll get some crime updates from NYPD. We have 13th and 17th precincts on, and then we'll go into the qualified immunity discussion in the second part of the meeting, which I think Stu has a draft resolution that we can discuss. All right, so let's talk. So first off, welcome to our new members. I know we have Sadie and Jonathan. So welcome to you both. Good to have you with us. Part of the reason I put NYPD on the top of this agenda, it's also we haven't met since the summer. So I generally will have updates from NYPD probably on average once a quarter, not every month, but certainly a few times a year. Really just to keep everybody in the loop on what's going on and the like. So they'll give some general updates. Feel free to ask questions. I want this committee to be on top of crime trends. When I talk about crime, I'm talking about generally the seven major index crimes, which we can cover in just a few minutes if you're not familiar with them. But those are statistics. There will be a lot of feedback from the community, which refers to quality of life issues. So I just want everybody to, especially our newer members, to be understand the difference there. The community members will often talk to us about quality of life issues. Doesn't necessarily mean there's crime taking place. There could be some crime, but that's generally what the community will talk to us about. The police department will talk to us about reported crime, and then from there, if there are quality of life issues that get brought to our attention, we can troubleshoot. So I'm going to start with the 13th precinct here. Just so everybody knows, there have been a couple of shooting incidents and a couple of homicides recently. I believe there are 2 murders in a 28-day. So I believe we have Detective Knapp with us. So welcome.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Detective Knapp. So far for the 28-day period, we're at 143 for this year. Compared to last year, it was only 125. So we're up 14%. What's driving that is grand larcenies, robberies, and burglaries. If there's any questions on that, I'll be.
Yeah, so why don't we talk, so let's talk, if you can just update the committee on, what were the 2 murders and the shooting incidents. I just want to get that out first, and then we can talk about some of the categories that are driving.
As far as for what the locations or?
Yeah, just a general over incident, where they occurred, what the general snapshot of what took place, for anybody that may not be familiar.
So one of the murders was on 14th Street and Broadway. That was due to a domestic incident. That was a shooting. And then the other one was on, I believe it was on 28th Street and 7th Avenue. That was also partly domestic, but that was a stabbing.
28th and where?
I think it was 7th Avenue.
7th on the west side?
On the east side of 7th. It was on our side.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So those are both actually outside of our district. So what are there any questions from the committee so far? Okay.
Sorry, I had a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't get a chance to raise my hand fast enough. But there wasn't. I thought that there was some type of violent incident in the East Village. Is that a different? I think more Alphabet City. Actually, maybe is that a different precinct?
That is the 9th precinct. If you talk about below 14th Street, FDR to it would be Broadway is 9th precinct.
Okay.
I mean, generally we want to keep the conversation on our district, but there are, you know, I do want to also keep everybody in the loop on things that happen, you know, nearby, just even if it's just outside our district. So that, you know, you cross the street in some places you're in CB5, but or in the 9th precinct or Midtown South or any of the other precincts. But as far as so if we can get into actually, you know what, let me go to Deputy Inspector Edwards, commanding officer to the 17th, to just kind of give an update there, and then we can go into any other questions for both cases.
Hi, Matt. Good evening, everybody. Matt, I feel like I just saw you. Right?
You're not kidding. We spent a couple
all right,
hours.
so for the 17th precinct, and just going into that same 28-day or 4-week period in crime, we are up slightly. We're up 21%, 90 versus 74 crimes overall. What's leading the way, really, it's our felony assaults and our grand larcenies. Felony assaults, they're up for the year, but not by a lot. And it kind of ebbs and flows. The majority of our felony assaults, it's usually some type of an acquaintance, whether it's domestic in nature, whether it's roommates fighting, whether it's you know, friends out in a bar and things just get out of control. That's usually our felony assaults. For this period, 5 out of the 9 were domestic in nature. We also made 8 out of 9 arrests on those. So we do pretty good clearances or make arrests on our felony assaults, which is kind of an indicator that the cops are responding quickly, they're asking the right questions, they're developing probable cause, and making that arrest right there, which frees up time for detectives as opposed to detective having to follow up on the case. We're getting the suspect off the street right away. For the 17th precinct, much like a lot of the commands in Manhattan South, grand larceny is our biggest crime driver. That usually accounts for about 60% of all of our crime. And so our grand larcenies are up because it's such a grand larceny overall is a big number. It drives our numbers up. The majority of our grand larcenies are either unattended, meaning, you know, you went to the restaurant, you left your, you know, you left your bag on the table while you ran to the restroom, you came back, it was gone. You know, maybe you're in Starbucks and you're working on your laptop, you go to use the restroom, you come back, someone took it. That would be an unattended. We get a lot of fraud. I'm sure everyone's gotten these phone calls for different scams, and you know, people do it become victims of that, where they're sending money to places or they're asked to purchase gift cards. So the majority of our grand larcenies are that. Early in the summer, we did experience a few jewelry snatches. There was a pattern going around the city with 2 guys on motorcycles. They went right on the sidewalk and snatched someone's chain. There was some video that came out of like somewhere in Manhattan North and other areas where you really saw them violently taking someone's jewelry. So we did have a couple of instances of that early in the summer. Another thing we've been dealing with is burglaries. Right now, our burglaries are down. We made a really good arrest on the burglary pattern recidivist about a month ago, and we've seen our commercial burgs really kind of level off after that. But the target now has been commercial stores that use lockbox. So a lot of stores will, at the end of the shift, at the end of the night staff will lock the key in a lockbox. And then the next morning, the morning staff will come and open up the lockbox and use the key to open up the establishment. So we have people that are getting access to those lockboxes, whether they're picking the locks, whether they found some type of technology to open these lockboxes, but it's not the traditional like break it and destroy it. They're actually, it looks like they're putting in the code. And so I don't know if there's some kind of new technology that's with it, if it's a particular lockbox. They're still working that out. But we've taken about, I'd say 4 of those in the last 6 weeks. And, you know, so that's something that we're keeping an eye on, and we're looking at other commands too to see if they're taking them. But that's, I mean, that's really it for the crime in the 17th.
All right, great. Thank you, sir. So do any members of the committee have any questions so far? I believe, Brendan, is there somebody in the public that has a question?
Yeah, Robert Bronstein was asking about issues with cyclists violating traffic laws, which I'm sure is something both precincts have heard about a lot.
All right, I will let the precincts answer that question, but I would also refer that to the transportation.
Yeah, so you know, it's a problem, it's a problem. The cyclists, whether it's traditional non-motorized cyclists or with the e-bikes now, it's a problem. All right. And we go out, we do enforcement. We write summonses. We confiscated e-bikes over the summer. We ran weekly operations on the 17th, where if it was mopeds, if it was motorized, if it was an infraction to be given, we give it. If we could take the bike, let's say it was unregistered, we would take the bike. But it's one of those things that you almost feel like you're swimming against the tide. You know, you write the summonses, but there's 20 more bikes going by you. So something that we have to continue to work on. I know there's other committees that are part of CB6, like the Transportation Committee, and I would ask that, you know, looking at it on a bigger scale, other than the precincts, in terms of public service announcements and PSAs about sharing the road and safe cycling and different things like that, particularly with the electric cycles, because that's a fairly new technology. The cost of it has come down so much. So it's not just delivery people. We see a lot of commuters using it. And, you know, it's a fast way to get around town. You don't have to get on the bus. But it's got to be more awareness about following the rules of the road. And I think we have to do more reaching out, not just an infraction, but just reaching out as a whole and making people aware that, you know, you've got to follow the same rules and regulations that a car would when you're operating these vehicles.
All right. Anything else from the committee? Don't be afraid to ask questions. All right, I guess you guys get off easy.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thank you to Detective Knapp. If you guys joining us. All right, and that brings us on to. Oh wait, sorry. I now I'm seeing some other questions in the. Detective Knapp, I guess, are you still on?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah, we have a question from a community member about NYPD staffing levels. Do you happen to have any knowledge about how they compare to pre-pandemic times?
So I can only speak for the 13th precinct. I don't have exact numbers, but you could tell it is a little bit lower than before the pandemic. There are definitely less cops.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a staffing issue, but there is less cops in the precinct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean we can find that out.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers.
And there's one more question. A community member noting about cars block the crosswalks at East 21st and 2nd. I guess they put in some 311 requests. I'll probably offline that one, Brendan, if you could follow up with Vinny Arlotta and the 13th on that one.
Absolutely.
All right. And then any plans to start a patrol to help stop drug use in the public areas? I don't know if there's any.
What was the question? Why?
It was a question of, I guess, really addressing drug use in public spaces.
Well, you know, as far as I know, the officers are out there. I mean, of course, if they see any drug use in public, they will address it accordingly.
Yeah, I would say for this issue, we'd have to be a little bit more specific and granular. So I'm happy to follow up with union members offline. Find out, you know, where I know there's plenty of parks and public spaces where there's issues, but between enforcement, cameras, and providing the services that the individuals really need, there's a lot of different answers we could give there. So, in the interest of time, let's have an offline conversation. Brendan, if you could facilitate that communication with anybody that's raising those issues. Delve into that offline. All right.
Have a good day.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so for the second item on the agenda, discussion on qualified immunity for police officers, which prevents officers from getting sued. So we kind of talked about this a little bit in the spring. We were short on committee members, so we have a couple of new committee members who may want to comment on the matter. I'm going to ask Stu to kind of frame the conversation a little bit. You've actually put together a draft resolution. By the way, for everybody for the new members especially, I want to hear all opinions here. You don't feel compelled to agree or disagree one way or the other. But the goal here is to have a conversation that represents the diversity of the community. So I want to hear any remarks for or against the items that we discussed. Stu, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks. So let me take about 5 or 6 minutes, more preliminary than to actually talk directly to the subject. Let me just start by saying that this is not defund the police. The bill in Albany that this resolution would support, in fact, gives to officers some of the financial protections they mistakenly believe that they get from qualified immunity. And that bill leaves wholly intact all the robust protections that police already receive when they make reasonable but mistaken decisions. So there are 3 points that I think we should touch on before we get to the substance of qualified immunity. The first is that the opposition to qualified immunity comes from both the political right and the political left. The most severe critic of qualified immunity is a conservative judge in Texas who was appointed by Donald Trump. The policy organization that has assumed the lead in opposing qualified immunity is the Libertarian Cato Institute, which is joined on the left by the ACLU, on the right by the Second Amendment Foundation, on the left by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and so on. You'll find similar opposition to QI in both right-leaning and left-leaning journals, including the National Review on the right and the New Republic on the left. On the other hand, on the Supreme Court, there's significant bipartisanship also, but the court is where qualified immunity originated under the liberal Earl Warren court. And it's been sustained by both the left and the right, although Justice Thomas has questioned it on originalist grounds and Sotomayor on policy grounds. So this is a topic, though, that you can't take your cues from Washington, D.C., the simple binary, because it's not a left-right issue. The second point is we usually hear about qualified immunity in the context of policing, but it's not just police. It can immunize from accountability for liability any state worker, whether it's a school administrator who wrongly strip searches a teenage girl, a social worker who unlawfully removes a child from her parents' home, a prison supervisor who exposes inmates to sexual assault by the guards, or a police officer who steals or who unjustifiably kills an innocent person. So any one of those government agents could have and has invoked the judgment policy of qualified immunity. And the third point is that qualified immunity protects officers from civil liability for money damages to the officer's victims. It is not what protects officers from criminal prosecution. In fact, the federal law that qualified immunity undercuts was enacted especially to allow individuals to sue an officer when the government could have but did not prosecute them criminally. So QI vitiates the very law that Congress passed to give us a degree of justice and restitution even when the government fails to act. And I should just add that QI precludes a trial. So it's not a defense at trial. It prevents you from even getting to the courthouse, through the courthouse doors effectively. So it began as a reasonable proposition in my view, but by twists and turns, year after year, the Supreme Court transmogrified it into a dishonest shield that protects even the most blatant, inexcusable official conduct. It works this way. Before you can sue a state official for violating your rights, you have to show that an earlier court found some other officer violated someone else's rights in almost the exact same manner as your rights were violated. So, for example, if a police officer uses the pretext of a search warrant to steal from you, and no police officer has ever stolen from someone in that way before, then that officer is immunized. You cannot even go to court. So essentially, the more novel the way you violate someone's rights are, the more likely you are to get qualified immunity. And I guess I can give an example of how absurdly close courts say that the prior case has to match your case in order to get immunity, in order to, overcome immunity. I don't love this case, but it's one that Cato loves. So there was a case with a cat burglar surrendered to police by sitting on the floor with his hands up. And even though he wasn't trying to escape, even though he was no threat to the police, they sicked their dog on him anyway. So he sued them for violating his rights because that's excessive force. And it's been established decades and decades ago that excessive force is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And that just means using more force than you need to affect what you're legal, what you were legally entitled to do. So in order for him to sue these officers, he had to show that there was a case similar to his, where police violated someone's rights in basically the same way. His lawyers came up with a case with another man who had surrendered to police by lying on the floor, and the police sicked their dog on him. And the court said that's excessive force. That's not permitted. That's a violation of your rights. So the guy thought he had exactly the right precedent. And the court said, no, not quite, because in the original case, the guy surrendered by lying on the floor. And in this case, he surrendered by sitting on the floor with his hands in the air. And so the concept is the cops couldn't possibly have known that this was a violation of the Constitution because the cases were different. So what you can see is it's sort of this pretense that that officers are too dumb to draw basic inferences from prior cases. And on the other hand, if there was a prior case that's right on point, then all of a sudden there's this pretense that the officer will know of that case and he will know the details and be able to do a flash analysis while he's in the field. So basically, qualified immunity is a device to simply keep police officers from even having to stand trial if you want to sue them for violating your rights. That's the upshot, I think.
All right, thanks, Stu. Committee members, questions, comments, thoughts? John?
Thanks so much for that, Stu. That was fantastic. There's really, I think, two doctrines at play here, and I don't know if it's worth us getting to this level of detail. There's qualified immunity, and there's the Bivens doctrines, which allow for a private right of action against police officers. They often intersect. They're slightly different, but overlapping for the most part. I don't know if we've previously discussed Bivens suits here, but I just wanted to raise it. It's essentially what allows for a private right of action under the Constitution, and that's the very narrow, it has to be the exact same set of circumstances in order for the lawsuit to proceed. qualified immunity is an affirmative defense police can raise in response to a Bivens suit or other action. I did also just want to point out qualified immunity is limited by the officer has to be carrying out their official duties at the time of the alleged violation. And the other thing that came to my mind, I was wondering which Texan judge you were referencing when you mentioned like conservative judges are really against this. I immediately thought of Scalia's dissent against qualified immunity, and I didn't expect you to reference a Texan judge. So if you don't mind sharing it, I'd love to look into them more. But thank you again for the overview. I thought it was really helpful.
I'm sorry, you're asking about the Texas judge that I mentioned, the conservative Trump appointee?
Yeah, I was just wondering which judge it was.
Judge Willett, Willet. I'm blanking on his first name. And I can send you later. I'll give you the case site.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
We didn't discuss Bivens because that applies to federal officers, and the state can't overcome that. So basically what the state law that's being proposed in Albany, and it was proposed this last session, I spoke to both of the sponsors, and they're going to reintroduce it in January with the same language. The law that qualified immunity undercuts, it's commonly known as Section 1983.
Yeah.
It actually dates back to 1871. And the law itself makes no exception. It doesn't say that officers should be immunized in certain cases. The Supreme Court, depending on who you ask, but basically devised that as a policy. So what New York State is proposing to do, and something similar has been done in Colorado and something less in Connecticut, is to simply to enact a very similar law, except the law will say, and there's no such thing as qualified immunity. The New York State law also assures police that they will not pay out of their own pocket, even if they're found to have violated someone else's rights. It is the state or the police department or the local government who will pay. And, you know, the concern was that you don't want police to fail to do their job because they're scared of being sued. And from a plaintiff's perspective, from the victim's perspective, you want to be able to actually recover damages if the court finds in your favor. And I mean, a lot of cops might not have it. So, the state has addressed the concerns, I think, of police officers. And I should add that the New York City Council did pass a more limited version of this law. It applies only to NYPD officers, not to other peace officers employed in the city. And it only applies to the equivalent of Fourth Amendment violations. So not, First Amendment retribution, not Eighth Amendment violations on Rikers, for instance. And the world did not collapse. So I think you will find that many police officers who don't know very much about it, about the operation of qualified immunity in the real world, are concerned that it's just another attack on officers. I don't think that's so. And there are some police organizations, most unions still support qualified immunity, but there are some police organizations which support its either abolition or modification to it.
I want to just very briefly apologize for referencing Bivens when I meant 1983. It's like a rookie 1L mistake. So sorry about that for any confusion.
All right. Yeah, let's try to keep this a little bit higher level without getting too much into the weeds here. At least, from the purposes of the committee discussion, I want to hear from some other committee members. What direction, should we go with this. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Also, let me know, Matt or Stu, whether it would be helpful for me to display a resolution that I know Stu has drafted on this.
But yeah, let's hear from some of the other committee members first, and then we can go back to that if the committee wants to go that way.
Okay.
I know it's a very complicated subject. I don't want us to get too far into the weeds here. Keep it, either support, moderately support, don't support, or take no action. Obviously there's a debate on the subject. There's a limit to what I can actually say, as somebody who works alongside police in the official community role. But I want to hear from others.
Stu, this is Seema. I was just curious. So you're saying you basically want to support the legislation that's out there? Or you want to, yeah, I didn't.
That's right. The resolution would support, I'm sorry, the resolution would support the legislation proposed in Albany.
Okay.
Yeah, and we should note that legislation did not pass in the prior session. So it's unclear whether to be reintroduced or.
Oh, okay, so it hasn't been reintroduced yet.
Not to my knowledge, unless something's happened in the past month or so, but yeah, it's sort of out there. Could be reintroduced, could be forgotten about. I'm not sure.
I don't know if it was brought to the floor, but either way, both sponsors in the Senate and the Assembly have told me that they will reintroduce it with exactly the same language as is present.
Yeah, I sort of have a feeling it will come back at some point. Again, this is not a time sensitive issue, but in the way the calendar works, we'll be out to November by the time we're gonna have a special training next month in lieu of a committee meeting. So, I don't want us, and we probably won't meet in December. So I don't want us to keep tabling matters. But that being said, I don't force the committee to take any action that they're not, ready to take. So, any.
I would just like to chime in to just say, like, I'm in support of putting forward a resolution from our committee.
Okay. Are you so all right, so let's do this. Let's Brendan, now we can, I think there's definitely at least a few committee members that would be supportive of the resolution. So I guess we can, I don't want to lead the witness here and put anything in front of anybody. But this resolution that Stu has written, if you just give everybody a minute or so to read through this. I don't think we circulated this to the committee at a time, so most of you are seeing this for the first time now.
And let me know if I'm scrolling too quickly as well. I'm also going to, for a moment, scroll straight to the resolved clause, since that's the most important.
There's a lot of
resolution.
Yes, I don't want to. There's probably. If it were up to me, I think we would shorten this a little bit. I think there's a lot of whereases. But yeah, let's focus on the resolve.
I can scroll back up to some of the whereases at some point.
Sorry, just to say that I think what we should resolve to do is just to support the reintroduction of that piece of legislation or possible legislation, as opposed to asserting opinion. Yeah, that's what I would just kind of think is best. Let me know if
Okay.
that makes sense.
So you would want to call for the reintroduction of the legislation without necessarily urging the passage of it, or?
I would just say that we support it and that we want it reintroduced.
For further discussion.
Yes, as opposed to saying, you know, right here, when public officials violate our rights, that eliminates qualified immunity, mandates the government's bear liability, blah, blah, blah. Like, I would just take all that out and say, therefore be it resolved that we support, you know, legislation number this, that, and the other, and hope that it is introduced in at the legislature or something.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much abstain from any police related things, but I would say that's probably a fair statement. It's basically just inviting a more detailed discussion at the legislative levels, which of course, you know, we can always make further statements down the road.
I only gave this a very brief read, so my apologies if I'm missing it. But Stu, were you contemplating this being specific to police officers or all local officials? I see there's references to, I think, both officials and officers.
I focused on police officers. The last or penultimate whereas says it applies to all other state actors as well. But because this is the Public Safety Committee and because qualified immunity is usually considered in the context of policing, that's what I focused on for the rest.
Got it. Thanks. And just to be clear, I really like the spirit of this. I really like it.
Or any other comments from anyone else? Would anyone like, if not, then would anyone like to make a motion?
Well, can we just hear, does anyone see any negatives to this or have any objections that we might discuss?
I can kind of give you a high level overview of what the police will say, but again, I can't really go one way or the other on it. But basically, I mean, they would, you know, I think a lot of them will tell you that they left New York because of this, and many have gone to other states where they feel more protected. So I think the risk factor here, whether it's a good piece of legislation or not, is that you'll have fewer police officers able to do their job in New York State, especially New York City, just because of the environment. So I think we did get a question earlier on about head counts in the precincts. That to me stands out as the biggest risk here. Is that, you know, again, the individual officers will follow their union's lead. So again, the unions carry a tremendous amount of weight in these conversations, and will basically advise the officers to what to do and what not to do. And there's also the possibility of being a little bit less proactive, but again, that's harder to quantify. So, I mean, those are the comments that I hear in conversations with them, which are of course off the record, but yeah, I do see there's risks there, but again, I can't really sway one way or the other. Brendan, did you have something?
Yeah, just a very quick question, just so that I could find this piece of legislation put into the chat. Do you happen, Stu, to know the bill number of the legislation that was introduced this year? Obviously, I know that in 2023 with the new session, there will be a new bill number.
Yes, the Senate bill was 1991. And that's all you need, because that'll link you to the assembly, which is the same language.
Okay, I will share it in the chat in just a moment.
And I'll just respond briefly. And I recognize that the union, especially the PBA, has a reflex reaction against this. You'll also note, though, that it was reported after George Floyd was killed that that police retirements accelerated and recruitment was more difficult. So, it's not entirely clear that that there's a net gain or a net loss of officers. My guess is that it won't have as much of a consequence as anyone predicts. For the most part, studies have shown, especially by a law professor at UCLA, who's sort of an authority on this, that one of the ideas of qualified immunity was we just don't want to distract cops by sending them to court. But it turns out that you can still sue often, not always, but you can often sue their employer, for a policy or practice that the officer violated. So the cop ends up going to court anyway. The other important, I think, data is that across the nation, police virtually never pay these judgments. They're indemnified either officially or in practice. So the number of dollars that any officer is paid, and I don't have the figure in front of me, but is really small. Even in Colorado, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I believe that the law in Colorado says that if there's a judgment, the officer pays something like 10% of it. And if the officer can't pay that 10%, then the state will still, or the municipality will still pay it. So officers aren't going to lose their homes over this.
Yeah, I mean, there's points on both sides here. So I mean, and there's probably some middle ground, just from where I sit, but I'll leave it up to you guys.
And I should just say one other thing is that most of this is because police officers simply don't know exactly how qualified immunity operates, and the fact that they will not end up losing their home. So it's more of a matter of what they know, but it's also just a reflex, I think.
All right. So as far as direction goes, and again, I know there's a lot of legalese here. I know there's a lot of legal cases that sort of need to be followed here, as the case with anything that becomes law, court cases. So as far as the direction here, do we want to support this? Do we want to call for the reintroduction? Do we want to take no action? Hearing a couple of different things. Anybody want to? We should
Yeah,
get back to raising hands, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I can raise my
No, it's okay.
hand. I would put in a motion to support with the amendment that I had stated earlier.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, the motion has been seconded. So we'll proceed to a vote, and Brendan, up the roll.
Okay, when I call your name, please say whether you're in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause. John DeRico.
In favor.
Stu Desser.
In favor?
Eric Goldberg.
In favor.
Sadie Howard.
In favor.
Steve O.
In favor.
Matt Roberts.
Abstain. Not sure if it's for cause or
You say that you're able to only make so many comments due to your capacity with the community council, correct?
yeah, I mean, I don't technically benefit from anything, but there's some gray lines there. So.
I would say abstain for cause is probably
Say
the
not
safest bet.
Okay.
Okay. Seema Shaw.
In favor.
Okay. So with 6 in favor and 1 abstaining for cause, the resolution passes as amended.
Button there. So thank you, everybody. Stu, Seema, I don't know if you two want to connect on language, or if we could just modify words.
Stu, let me know if you want my help, but I think you got the gist of what I was trying to say with the resolved section.
All right. Stu, are you good with that?
I'm not quite clear. Let us connect. Let's Seema and I connect to
Okay.
discuss this quickly.
But all right. So the overall was voted on. So thanks everybody on that. So that really takes care of the agenda tonight. I did want to leave a few minutes for my chair's report, I guess. Don't have anything else other than the UN General Assembly, which I talked about last night at full board. There are videos coming out tomorrow with more detailed information on 17 Precinct Council sites, social media handles, 17 Precinct CC, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I will be writing that up later on this evening. But outside of that, I want to open it up to you guys to see if there's any topics, anything you'd like to learn more about. I want to kind of probe the committee to see where your interests lie. I want this committee to be interesting and everybody that's serving here. So if there's anybody has any ideas, I should mention that next month we'll be doing a innocent bystander training. So there will not be a regular committee meeting, but we're still working through the details on that. I know Seema and I've been working on that had that in the works for a while now, so since the spring. But I think that's a very important thing. It's not really labeled very well, but it really gives you. I will say that the preliminary meeting we had with the agency that is conducting it gave us some really valuable and useful pointers from a human rights lens. So that is the other area that this committee focuses on. I know it's really a public safety committee, but for right now we still have human rights issues as well. So I want to hear from you guys. Steve?
Couple the repeating issues that we're seeing is bike lanes, bicycles, e-bike related safety issues. A couple of those questions did come up in the public. I know in the past, public locally elected officials have been trying to raise education programs for the public about bike safety and about the use of bike lanes. I'm not quite sure how we can follow up or how those education programs are presented to the public. I guess it'd be nice to kind of reintroduce that notion so that if we can provide public safety education programs for the bike laws and the use of bike lanes, I think it would help strengthen some of the issues that we're seeing in terms of public safety. That's obviously being repeated over and over because of the bikes, e-bikes, and the use of bike lanes.
Yeah, I mean that's a valid point there. I mean it's questionable whether that would be under us or under transportation or joint. I would suspect that would be a joint issue. What I would certainly recommend on that front is a budget request jointly with transportation committee. I think would be the first step. And then from there, once there's some funding behind it, then we could sort of figure out who do some of that within the 17th precinct. But it's been very difficult to go to a lot of the restaurants. It used to be that the restaurants and delivery bikes would come from, would be individually hired, and you could just go to their go to the restaurant managers and then point out, those things. But now it's all got different companies, Grubhub, Seamless, Uber Eats, you name it, that hire and employ these freelancers. So it's very difficult to get a hold of anybody. And then of course you have other riders too, and other kinds of other mopeds and other mobility devices. I know Brian mentioned some of that last night. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a growing concern there. Even within the bicycle lanes themselves, you have regular pedal assist bikes, you have all kinds of different e-bikes, you have mopeds using those lanes. So I think, and that was something I was concerned about, even before e-bikes were legalized, is just the variance of speeds there, which cause different behaviors and some conflicts there. So I do agree with you that education is very important. I know Reshma is working on the budget requests. So I don't know, Brendan, if there's still opportunity for the committee to propose something. I think this one would have to go through transportation as well. But I'm not really sure what the right path forward would be there.
Yeah, I would start by saying that I think this is something that you all should connect with Brian Van Nieuwenhoven, the chair of our transportation committee, about. The extra advantage of getting in touch with Brian is that he's also a member of the Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee. So I think Brian would be good to connect with, especially since there are some transportation elements going on here. Even if the Public Safety Committee ends up being the home of such a budget request, I think making sure that you all are on the same page with transportation and getting in touch with transportation would be wise.
Okay. So let's do this. Steve, why don't you send me an email and copy Brian? And then, or if you don't have Brian's email, I can respond and copy him. But I think we'll do that, and then his committee will meet in October before we won't. If we needed to, we could caucus before full board if there was a need to pass anything. But I think they could probably take the lead on this one. I know the budget deadlines are coming up next month, so if not this year, we can certainly work on a request through other channels. But I think since the budget season is coming up, it makes sense to go that path. All right. I like the idea. Stu?
Just to add, last night I asked the representative from the borough president's office about what they were thinking about, and I emailed that rep and I copied Brian. So we'll hear what plans, if any, the borough president's office has, even though it's really a DOT probably issue. And just my quick reflection is, I don't think of this as being about education. I think that you have to design your infrastructure, your facilities, so that they accommodate everything we have, and that they sort of force people to behave fairly well, because enforcement never, has the effect that we wish.
Yeah, I mean, the enforcement is definitely an issue. I mean, a part of it, but I think the issue is the rules of the road have been pretty lax as far as enforcement goes. So I think it's become a free-for-all. And I think that's, you really need to educate people. I mean, if it were up to me, everyone who rides a bike would, take at least some online training course. You got to get a license to operate an automobile or anything, but you don't need any kind of certification to operate a bicycle. But you could, especially with the e-bikes, you could still cause a lot of damage. So, I mean, I think an education program. I think at some point you're going to need some sort of certification. But I mean, that's a long ways down the road. But education would definitely help, but I think the city really just needs, and the city council really needs to come to terms with, you know, how do we live with everything that we're seeing now? And deliveries are only going to get more common. I hate to say it, but our society is very lazy. So the more things that can be delivered, whether it's your coffee in the morning, we're going to want that delivered and fast. So delivery bikes are not going away. More and more people are turning to them as a form of transportation. So, anyway, I digress. Steve, you got something?
Right, so supporting also Stu's comments, but the observation or the lens I'm looking at is to try to introduce a long-term observation of a culture of proper riding, much similar to how local New Yorkers know not to stop at the top of an escalator in a subway. You're right, but as we've seen, visitors who are new to New York are, will make that mistake and will be quickly educated by the locals because of the culture. That is just one example that in the long term that built over time that hopefully we could do the same thing for bicycles. And as we've seen, micromobility is changing, it's increasing, they're getting creative of how they're doing things. But if we can coincide with the culture, because we are the densest part of the city, we're going to see some interesting things. We have tunnels and bridges that cross into our areas. So I think culture is a very important thing to slowly introduce. And plus, with education, the more readily it's available, the more it's out there, more like a carrot rather than a stick. It's also referential for law enforcement, for building any capital works or any management or anything. We need something to springboard off of. And I think starting with an education is a baseline, not to solve all, of how to approach a better micromobility culture in our district.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I would say put together a note. Let's talk to Brian. See, what we can do on a joint committee basis, whether it's a budget request or some other advocacy effort. But I think that would be a good one. Any other topics or areas of interest from any other committee members?
Oh, and we should add, we should talk to Brian about tourists and revolving doors also, which is, which they apparently don't have in Mayberry. Matt, could I just ask what vision you have for where the topics that we should be looking at over the next year?
Yeah, there's a lot of different areas that we could potentially cover. Ultimately, this committee was formed mainly to really have better relationships with not just the police department, but all the other service agencies, whether it be the fire department, sanitation. So, I would say, on a monthly basis, I would like to have, updates from those agencies on a rotating scale. Because I don't think we really hear from the fire department very much. We certainly don't hear from sanitation too much. I know that could also be environment. But, that was really the reason this committee was formed, and then to balance everything we do on human rights as well. So this one, I think human rights could be its own committee. So I think the bystander training next month, I think is very important for everybody to kind of learn, just things that we were not necessarily aware of on a regular basis. So those would be areas, but I really want this committee to be driven by you guys. I want us to work on issues that you guys are interested in. I think that's important. If I pick all the topics and you guys aren't interested, you're not going to show up. You're not going to be very involved. So got a few hands up. Let's go to Jonathan.
I have, and this may have been discussed already. I have some friends and family on the force, and something they've communicated to me pretty uniformly is they felt very isolated from the communities they work in. And I was wondering if there's any appetite, or if this has been previously discussed, to do more community outreach, community involvement events between the public at large and the local precincts. I know we have the build the block stuff, but I was just curious. It was something that just popped in my head.
Yeah, as far as programming, I mean, as the president of the 17th Precinct Council, which is one of my other roles, I do a lot of programming. And I think the next thing I'm working on is a Halloween event for the kids. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of programming options. I do have a little bit of a budget there to work with, but a lot of it is, you know, you have the money and an idea, it can happen. So some of it is the drawback I have with that group is I have a board of 5 people. So I don't really have the volunteers to do all the legwork, but I do have the funding. So if there's ideas, and that's 17th Precinct is, you know, north of 30th Street. 13th Precinct, I know they're just at their council, just went through a leadership change. So I'm not sure what their goals are, but those are probably the better outlets where the community can directly. The build the block meetings are good for getting, you know, local issues resolved, like you're, you know, a problem on the block or something like that. But as far as like programming, community councils are 501c3 organizations that have their own budgets, and they work side by side with the police department in their respective precincts. So I mean, you know, in the 17th, we've also done, you know, we're working on some murals that can be painted by some of the high school kids in the area. So I think there's done some graffiti removal events recently. Every summer, everybody does a night out against crime in August. So the block party, music and food, and just bring everybody together. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. If you have any specific ideas, you know, it's really the community board doesn't necessarily have funding for that, but we could certainly connect with the people who do have funding.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see, Matt.
Sorry, I was just curious if we were, you know, I know it's so complicated and hard to do necessarily anything per se, but did we want to address, I was just struck by the number of comments yesterday as it relates to the hotel that's been turned into a homeless shelter. So, you know, I don't know if there's anything we can do, how we want to be responsive. You know, I just wanted to open that up for maybe a quick brainstorm.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, that location I've heard complaints about all the way since 2020, and they've not gotten better. I mean, I think, you know, I do tend to get involved with DHS issues from time to time, but I feel like that's a leadership issue at the DHS level. I'm not sure how the setup works without location in that contract, but I feel like the people there are probably, you know, just, you know, not doing everything they can do with that particular location. So we'd have to look at the contract and see who's responsible for what and where the gaps are. It sounded like they were looking for a curfew for the individuals there, but I don't know that that's going to solve all the problems. People have a legal right to be out and about in public spaces. They don't have the right to, you know, not obey the rules of the park or the plaza. But I mean, people have to have some acceptance of that. But I have to take a closer look. We can certainly take it up. I know Rich Mintz is a little bit closer to the situation, since the quality of life and safety issues are coming from a homeless shelter or a temporary facility. So again, yeah, we could certainly look to do something on a joint basis with Rich. But it really depends where the issues are. If it's cameras or enforcement or something like that, we could certainly, you know, advocate and make that happen. But I just don't know what's legal and what's illegal and what's just quality of life where people just don't like their neighbors. Steve, you have something else?
This is a scaled back kind of comment from the previous public safety meeting based on the observations of a number of cameras that we have in our district. We look into a possible analysis or study where there are cameras in our district and how that overlays with where the police is seeing activity. Where basically the outcome of the study is to provide a baseline where we have blind spots. And with that study, we could think of solutions, programs to help incentivize, build, or something to help fill in those blind spots, be it with a partnership with businesses, the public, but ultimately just an observation or analysis or report or study to see where those blind spots are.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to say because when you're talking about cameras, there's so many different kinds of cameras. There's private cameras, there's city-funded cameras, there's, all kinds, there's traffic cameras. Like there's, the police will use all kinds of cameras, depending on they're doing an investigation. So any of those can be utilized. As far as gaps, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, it's not just, as I've said in other meetings, it's not just where cameras don't exist, but how do you ensure that they're functioning properly? That's generally been the comment that I hear when there's a challenge with an investigation is they had a camera, but it wasn't working properly at the time, at the date and time, whatever incident took place. So I think it's one thing. I think it's obviously, cameras are a good thing for investigations, but they require money. They require maintenance. So it's one thing to put them in, but then you got to maintain them. So it's even if we've got money to fill in the gaps wherever they happen to be, you got to maintain them every year. You got to make sure they're constantly working. So I don't know that that's really practical. And there's also, there's a limit to how much public information can be put out about certain cameras. Obviously, you don't want criminals to know, where those spots are. So I would say that's also a confidential matter that we can't discuss in a public setting.
Again, this was just for a study or analysis. It doesn't have to have personal identifiable information or specifics, but this is kind of tailed off of the last quarter's Build-A-Block where, for example, someone from the public who is an operator of a hotel has discussed how he has spoken to a lot of his neighboring businesses, how, for example, they'd be very much more than willing to help coordinate amongst each other to better protect their businesses by checking each other's cameras, making sure everyone's got what they need. And they were going to do this on their own efforts for their own neighborhood. I think that was admirable. I think that's sound. I think that's even repeatable if in a broader sense. And the reason why I asked for a report or analysis of what we're seeing today is just to provide a baseline. No, not to make recommendations immediately after that, just to observe, are we seeing challenges where the police are unable to find evidence where they might be high crime. For example, they mentioned one of the highest things we have is grand larceny in the 17th precinct. If there's no evidence of that, of how to capture that, it makes it more challenging. As you can see, it's also resource intensive if we don't have cameras. If there is no way to arrest these individuals, more resources are spent to try to find out who these people are. But if there's resources from the neighborhood that exist, like cameras, it lends itself to help supplement our friends at the precinct to help close these incidences. So it's just a request to look into an effort or study or analysis of cameras in the district, And it could be, it doesn't have to be well defined. I'm not trying to get into the weeds of it all. Like we're saying, like, here's an address that has cameras here and there and so on and so forth. It's to start an observation of where we're seeing challenges. Because I think without that, we're kind of letting ourselves a lot of pressure onto the police and the community, who are more than willing to step forward, just kind of being impatient, waiting for either they do it themselves or get upset in between us as the members of the community board and the police.
Yeah, I mean, I'll shop that one around, see if I'll have some conversations. I don't know what can be studied there, but I would also point out that the first thing that we wanted, I mean, you mentioned grand larcenies and stuff like that. I mean, what you really want to do is prevent those crimes by, training people to not leave their property unattended or in a place, or leave their bag on the back of a chair at a restaurant or something where they can't see it. Those are, if I were to, focus my time and energy, or even had funding, those would be the practices that, I'd want to train the waitress or the waiter in a restaurant to, alert these people if they see bad behavior when it comes to property. I think those types of things would probably prevent a lot of crimes. If people are sitting at Starbucks and leave their laptop unattended for a quick second to get another drink or something, or go to the bathroom, those are things that can be preventable. So I'd say that would be more of an area of focus than cameras, because reality is a camera will aid the detective potentially if it was in the right place, and had a good angle and was working and is clear enough. But most cases are closed to arrest fairly quickly. Some are not, but the ones that are not are generally because these people are dressed in all black. They're wearing a mask. They're wearing a hoodie. They're wearing things that would prevent cameras from even capturing a good image of them. So I think those are more the challenges. But I would be more focused. If it were up to me, I would focus on the crime prevention aspect, because grand larcenies, and truthfully, grand larcenies are only up because there's more activity versus a year ago. 2021 still back and forth with COVID. So when the statistics are given, they're talking about the same time frame last year, which means there were fewer people out and about, fewer events taking place, fewer opportunities for property to be stolen, largely. And then identity theft is another aspect that that's really nothing that cameras or any police resource can control. You have to educate people to be a little bit smarter. They get a phone call that's a scam, or an email that's a scam, to really detect those and not follow through on. So, good points. I'll see what we can do as far as cameras. We'll look into the 24th Street area with Rich. We'll talk to Brian about bike behavior and whatnot. Stu, you have something else?
Yeah, one other thought. You said police officers feel sort of isolated, and you sit at this intersection between the community councils and the community board. The last time I went to a community council was decades ago. You walk into the police precinct, there's that big stop sign there. I don't know if it's still like that. You feel really unwelcome, and you get to the back and there's some ladies serving cookies. It's not exactly, we use the term outreach, but what would be really nice if there were a way that we could bring officers actually to meet real people who don't necessarily purposefully go to the precinct, but that there are some sort of forums in buildings or on the street where people just walk by, and they get to talk to actual officers, and not just the community affairs officer or the captain. I don't have a more formed idea than that, but that's really, if I think there's a perception, and I don't think it's unreal, that there's an us them culture in policing. And the police have it, and members of the community have it. And maybe we should try as a community board to break that down a little bit.
Yeah, you're certainly not wrong. I mean, I have similar sentiments every time I walk into the precinct, just like I did this afternoon for, even though I'm there pretty regularly. Most of them know me, but some don't. But yeah, it still feels like, how can we help you? What brings you in today? It's not very welcome. As far as the community council meetings, I mean, I hold mine, at a synagogue, the streets, even have people coming into the precinct. I do try to get more officers involved. But truthfully, a lot of them are very shy. They're not very polished speakers, and they're not, they're hesitant to speak in front of an audience. So that's one thing that I try to get them involved, a little bit more involved in the community, and get them in front of the public a little bit more frequently. Because a lot of times they just respond to incidents when they call 911. But yeah, I would love to see, more authentic interactions, maybe having coffee with them, just chit chat, not necessarily to complain about local issues, but, just, to kind of smooth those lines. Because I do agree with what you're saying, but I'm just not sure how we could formalize that, or if there's anything that the board or the committee can do. We can try to bring in, certain police officers, not necessarily right now. When I make a request, whoever's available joins. Generally, it's the highest ranking, but maybe if you guys had any interest in like the detective squad, have a detective come and talk about how they conduct an investigation or something like that. But I mean, yeah, I just don't know how we can really improve that. It's been an ongoing issue, and every time I talk to the rookies, they're when they come into the new class, they're very shy, they're very quiet, they're not very outgoing. I wish there was a way to break that cycle.
Well, can we as a board encourage community, set up a table at a farmer's market? Or I mean, I haven't thought this through, but basically casual interactions where people are, and and the officers don't feel like there's the supervisor looking over their shoulder. So it's a sort of human to human.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that. I mean, you could start by inviting them to different events. If there are, I would say if there are any community events that you guys are aware of, I know a lot of the elected officials, representatives, put them out at full board, or organizations hold events. I would say, double check with me. We could invite the police. I mean, I will say Deputy Inspector Edwards, who was on earlier, is always asking me at least once a month, what's happening in the community, what events are coming up that they can partake in. So I'd say, if there's holiday events, I mean, Halloween, I'm sure there'll be some stuff with the kids. Once we get into the holiday season, if there's any gatherings, social events, parties, receptions, I would say send them an invite. I can't guarantee they're going to come, but they do look for those, especially the NCOs and the higher ups. Do look for that stuff. So yeah, I mean, good point. But flag some events for me. I'll see if I can get them to participate. Anything else? Let's see. Sadie, haven't heard from you at all. Put you on the spot. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Anything you're interested in?
I think sorry, I'm really bad at speaking just like on the spot like this.
That's okay.
Talking about earlier with qualified immunity, that was really interesting to me, but I feel like Stu said everything I wanted to say, but like sound but more well spoken than I could have. But yeah,
Huh?
that's where I'm at.
Some more like legislative based issues and those type things.
Yes.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll have plenty of those. There's almost always, in a September to June cycle, there'll be at least a half dozen pieces of legislation that pertain to public safety that will be chiming in on. So there's all of that. But yeah, if you guys think of anything else, almost at 8 o'clock, so we'll leave it there. But if you guys think of anything else, let me know. Again, we'll probably cancel the traditional meeting for October, but we'll have the innocent bystander training. So I hope everybody will participate in that. If the schedule changes and for some reason they're not available anymore, then we may switch it up a bit. But they have the dates; it's on their calendar. So I think everybody can benefit, and hopefully a lot of the other board members will join, and any members of the public that are interested. And if you're not sure what it is, if you're unclear, we can send you a little bit more to read about it. So I think it's going to be really productive for everybody. Steve?
Kind of tangential to Stu's comments about community outreach. Our full board meeting is a great example where there were just outpour of events that elected officials mentioned, agencies have mentioned, different committees have mentioned. That's not even in our official CB6 website. Some of them are just great places that we could start inviting our local police officers. Like there's always, I feel like that's a bit of a gap where we don't really track a lot of the events that actually happen in our community that we should, and that we should probably make it a point to have the police involved so they can see and meet them in firsthand. So just some of the things that you notice, like, when they see police attending more events, people want to talk to them. I mean, you've seen it before where there's a parade going on and there's police officers manning the gates, just bored out of their minds. People are just want to talk to them just randomly about stuff. I think that could have the same effect for many of the events that we do have here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just make sure I'm aware of. I mean, I hear a lot of them are just resource events, and so I can't possibly take down every one of them. But if you see something that where it's like a reception or something that where there's interaction, especially if there's kids involved, those events I think would be perfect.
And I missed a kind of a thought here. It just slipped my head before I got a chance to say it, but I think we should actually enforce or ask of the individual committees when they do have events to consider inviting the police in mind as an extension of this outreach, of an extension of public safety. So I think, is that something that we can do to kind of reach out to our other committees?
Yeah, I mean, Brendan, I don't know if there's if you track anything at the board office. So what Steve is saying, whether if there's like, I don't know, any way to better track them. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it's easier than for each committee groups to think of that rather than one of us literally go and look up every event, right? If they make it a practice to always consider to include the police.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will mention something at executive committee for the other committee chairs. I'm just saying that our committee felt it was important to get the police involved in more community events. So if they're become aware of them, let me know. Something like that.
And just,
what else?
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, sort of tangential to this, if there is ever a community event that you hear about that sounds really good, but you don't see on the CB6 website, don't hesitate to reach out to the office. We, as an office, try to catch as much as we can, but as you might guess, on full board night, there's enough going on that there may be some things that we miss.
There's a lot that poured out yesterday, so
Yeah,
here we
I
go.
mean, I get questions too. Like I got probably several emails about the street co-naming for Jimmy Neary on 57th Street yesterday. Which many people were invited to, but I can't get to everything. So it's like, yeah, I would say, we'll try to better coordinate. I think as the holidays approach, there'll be a lot more stuff and a lot of in-person events. Just how many ones over the last couple of years for obvious reasons. Sadie?
Sorry, I know that the conversation kind of got a little steered away from this, but I wanted to go back to what Steve was saying about police at events. I think he makes like a really good point about that, but I also think something else to consider is that a lot of people don't necessarily like feel safe or welcome around police. And if we want to create a community where people are like going out more, spending more time together, then maybe a bigger police presence is more of a deterrent and would sort of go against that goal.
Yeah, I definitely can see how that might be an issue. I think what Steve is probably referring to is a couple of officers that are there to chit chat. Not necessarily a big swarm of officers like you'll see next week if you're anywhere near the UN. But it's more just more casual conversation. Maybe they're not in their uniform, maybe they're in their polo shirts and some of their alternative outfits that they can wear. But yeah, it would be more to like, I mean, I'll give you an example. Each precinct has 1 or 2 youth coordination officers, which are really there just to connect with youth and work with kids. They do a lot of work with the schools and a lot of different programming. So anytime there's kids around, they're there as more of like a mentor, not necessarily there for security purposes, but they're really just there to build relationships and try to build that relationship when they're younger, so that they don't develop a fear from the police. But good point. All right. Anything else before we go? I know we're a few minutes after 8 o'clock, but a good first meeting of the fall. If you come across anything, outside of meetings that you want to talk about or think we should pursue, just drop me an email. I will say that I get a lot of emails. So those of you who have emailed me will know that it takes me a good 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes to get back to you guys, but I do read them. I don't delete them. If it is urgent, I'll get back to you pretty quickly, but if it's not urgent, it may take a week or so, just because I have so many different meetings and probably like 3 or 4 different community commitments. So bear with me, but looking forward to working with the new people, continuing to work with those of you who've been around. And I think we'll probably be back in person sometime this fall. Sneaking suspicion. So, lots to look forward to. So thanks everybody. I know it's Thursday night. I would try to keep these meetings as short as I can usually. This one went a little long because it's the first time in a while. But Thursday nights, I know we're very busy. There's a lot going on. So try to keep these generally to an hour 15. All right. So appreciate everyone's time. And I guess we can adjourn, right?
You can see if there are any objections to adjourning
All
from
right.
committee members, and if not, then the meeting is adjourned.
Does anyone object to adjourning? That's what I thought. All right. The meeting is adjourned at 8:05. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.